Hi, I'm Michael Appel for BizNews.com. Up for discussion today is a new bill that's out for public comment. It's called the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorist and Related Activities Amendment Bill. It sounds very impressive and most likely good for us all. But is it? Rob Hutchinson is the chairman of DearSA South Africa. It's a non-profit platform which enables the public to co-shape all government policies, amendments, and proposals. Rob, thanks for your time today. Firstly, just give us an idea of the work DearSA is involved in. When was it started, and has the need for an NPO like yours grown in recent years?
Yeah, I'll start there. The need has definitely grown. We've seen a massive uptake in subscribers and participants and whatever else that we do, and we encourage public participation throughout all government policy decisions or decision making. And it's actually in the Constitution. The Constitution mandates that government must involve the public in policy decisions, and especially lawmaking and drafting of legislation. However, they definitely don't do that to the extent and with the transparency that they should. So we fill that gap. We started about 5 years ago, and it's grown massively ever since. We're sitting at about 1.3 million subscribers and active participants, and regularly send out calls for participation in our campaigns. We've run about, I'd say, over 200 campaigns to date, and seen quite a few successes in what we do. Anybody who participates is seen as a success in shaping policy. But yeah, it's been a great journey, and we've definitely, I think we've shifted the notion of democracy, getting people more involved, more aware of what's going on, and so on. So from that point, it's been an incredible journey, and hopefully we'll be around for a lot longer.
We have an incredibly progressive constitution in South Africa, lauded all over the world, that protects freedom of expression, freedom of association. Are those ideals under threat in this country? And I say that mindful of the fact that we've just had a journalist hauled into the dock by a convicted felon facing mountains of corruption charges. But my question still stands.
Yes. I think we're definitely freedom of expression and association is without a doubt under threat. There's a definite move in a lot of policy to I'd say bolster government's stronghold over the public, and a move to a stronger and larger and more authoritarian approach by government through all policy and even the actions that they do take. I don't think we're unique in South Africa in seeing this progression, but it seems to be a global movement. And as I said, there are a lot of bills that are being put forward that do test the Constitution to its absolute limits, especially in the rights guaranteed to us in the Constitution.
Okay, well, let's chat about this new bill that I mentioned in the introduction. On the face of it, who wouldn't want to, as the name denotes, protect our constitutional democracy against terrorism? Is there something more sinister going on here?
Yeah, it's a wonderful example of government doublespeak in that naming of that bill, without a doubt. Although it is presented as protecting constitutional democracy, if you read the bill and go through the finer details of it, there's no doubt it's a threat to constitutional democracy, in that the public are under threat as being labeled terrorists under the incredibly loose definitions within the bill, and also the loose definitions around the what is deemed as a terrorist act or activity. So it's up to government to decide what is at that point. And really, we've seen ourselves have been subject to such allegations by government. DearSA was called a terrorist organization, undermining democratic processes. And all we did there was send about 300,000 comments from the public through to government on amendments to the Health Act. So that if I think if this bill and the amendments were in place and under the Act, then we could have been held liable, called terrorists, and who knows what else, locked up, prosecuted, and held captive. And not just us, but also the 300,000 people who had their say through our platform. So, yeah, I think it's a quite a disturbing bill, which seems to have gone under the radar somehow.
Okay, so the verdict is out on whether or not we're going to get grey listed. Smart people out there say it's almost a foregone conclusion. So is that where all of this legislation comes from, trying to meet the Financial Action Task Force list of concerns? I think there was 300 or something concerns to the South African government. Is that where this swath of legislation comes from?
Yes. This isn't the only bill that is out under that same notion. There are a few others, and it all is by the Financial Action Task Force demanding certain changes in legislation and a tightening around the financial activities of terrorism funding and so on. Not just in this area, but it seems to spread into almost every policy that we do that is out. So we're seeing amendments in financial bills, financial laws, regulations, and so on. And to be honest, I agree with the notion that grey listing is inevitable for South Africa anyway. This is just an excuse put forward by government to push through this legislation. And interesting enough, there are 3 points in this new bill. The first two are involved with or surrounded by the Financial Action Task Force demands, but the third seems to be put in by the government itself to curb domestic terrorism. And it's quite ridiculous, really, because we have adequate laws in place already that do deal with it and have dealt with these issues in the past quite successfully. So in addition to the existing legislation makes no sense. But if you look at it from government's point of view, where you have a failing government, where they're on the back foot or under international pressure, then it makes a lot of sense from government's point of view to quieten dissidents and so on. It could be used as a great tool to silence political opposition. And as we've seen, it's a great threat to civil society organizations and religious bodies and anybody who's outspoken about politics or actions taken by government.
You know, Rob, I remember chatting to Terry Crawford Brown, the man who took the government on over the arms deal. And he once said to me that the commissions of inquiry that Ramaphosa and Zuma and this government is so in love with is a place to park a political hot potato. It's a way to look busy while doing nothing. Do you think that the introduction of all these bills is a good way to look busy when it's actually the implementation of what's already there that this state is famously horrible at? You know, take the push of Fikile Mbalula to have the 0 drinking limit implemented, which is going to mean absolutely jack if your officers don't already enforce the existing limits.
That is a major problem in South Africa. We come up with these wonderful policies and wonderful ideas, and on paper, they might look good, and as you say, might make the government look like they're actually doing something. But there's a definite lack of ability to enforce laws or even carry out policies and proposals from our government. And I think that just shows the weakness of our government, that they almost created a distraction and create a path or an avenue to shift the blame to something else. And it doesn't work well. The existing legislation is more than adequate. Yes, we do have some outdated laws and bits of legislation, but they are slowly being brought into line by the relevant body. And I seem to think that there's more international pressure on South Africa to to bring our laws in line with international law. Well, that's all well and good, but South Africa is quite a unique environment with its own unique problems and situations. Therefore, that it doesn't make sense to apply international laws as they are, We need to refine them, adapt them to South African situations and our economic environment as well. And our government doesn't seem to have the ability to be able to do that.
I want to talk about NPOs, non-profit organizations, and them being a continual thorn in the side of government. For every court case against the ANC or against the department, some other department, there is always an NGO that is either the applicant or an amicus. I want to quote from a 28 June 2022 press statement put out by the Home Affairs Department. And it says, quote, "There's a disturbing and growing trend by some NGOs to sabotage the polycentric and policy-laden decisions taken by government by using the courts. This development must be nipped in the bud as soon as possible. South Africa is now under the dictatorship of some of the NGOs, with some having faceless and dubious funders. Their ultimate aim is to assist in the dislodgement of government of the day from power by all means available," close quote. Thoughts on that, Rob?
Well, yeah, I think that's the preamble to this terrorist act as well, and probably the reason for it. If you look at history, and not many of us do take notice of what's happened in the past, during the fall of the Soviet Union, the first thing they did was outlaw non-profit organizations and the funding thereof. And that was because they realized that in a non-political sense, non-profit organizations and civil society groups can have immense pressure on government, on policy, and on the idea of the public getting involved and taking control of matters into their own hands. And that's essentially the job of nonprofits. They're supposed to perform a watchdog duty over government and promote transparency within government as a separate body. So, if that is the opening statement, then it immediately raises red flags for us. Is government seeing us as a threat, and why are they seeing us as a threat? What are government's plans to going forward? And well, I can speak for myself personally here. That just makes us want to go in even harder and uncover the truth and find out what's going on. So we do see this new bill as a major threat to the actions that nonprofits can perform, and even as far as human rights are concerned, or in cases of disaster, we've seen great action from groups like Gift of the Givers, for instance. They fill in the gaps where government is simply unable to do so. Their actions will also be under threat.
I was chatting to Prof. Jonathan Jansen, the education stalwart, who in the interview with me encouraged people to, quote, "vote the buggers out." And he was speaking about a growing authoritarianism in South Africa that you've alluded to, cognizant of the fact that you and I can sit on a platform, we can speak openly about the government of the day, of the president, of the ruling party, and we're not dragged out of our beds at night. But I've heard you say in an interview that you did that signing a petition to say Ramaphosa must go, could you then see yourself designated as a threat to the state? Surely this can't stand.
No, absolutely. But under the loose definitions of this act, you could be seen as undermining the state, or attempting to overthrow the state by suggesting that Ramaphosa must be removed. And that's one very important word in the actual bill. They talk about the implications and suggestions around encouraging terrorist activity, and the word "encouraging" is quite open to interpretation. What exactly does it mean to encourage a terrorist activity? And there again, what is a terrorist activity? So suggesting that Ramaphosa could be or must be removed is definitely an encouragement of a terrorist activity by suggesting that we should overthrow the government. So yeah, even simple suggestions and conversations like we're having now are under threat. And let's be honest, the investigative journalism that is happening now with Karen Morn in in court right now, as you mentioned at the beginning, is a perfect example of it as well. If this act was in place, she wouldn't even be in court. She'd be instantly detained for exposing things that quote unquote shouldn't be exposed. But everything should be exposed. Everything should be transparent, and you can't rely on government to be fully transparent about whatever activities they do. It is simply the action of civil society organizations that makes it possible, and especially investigative journalism.
Just so that everybody understands the importance of the work you do versus simply creating petitions. You get one petition that gets 1 million signatures. How does Parliament view that petition?
So we don't run petitions. I was just clear that first of all, because petitions are exactly that. If 1 million people sign a petition, they've all agreed to the mandate within that petition. So there's no need for government to consider any comments or anything else. They'll deem that entire petition with 1 million signatures as one submission to government. Our process is rather different. We deliver each individual comment through to government as an official submission, which under constitutional law, government has to acknowledge and consider in the final decision-making process. So it's quite effective from a number of points of view. The first one is that it maybe overburdens government, and that's also criticism that we have seen from other bodies. Overburdens government with too much public participation, and therefore they can't get to the valuable content that does come in. We do provide reports and summaries, so government doesn't have to go through the millions of emails that do come through to them. And so we try and eliminate the empty comments and deliver and summarize the full comments. But yeah, it is, as I said, it is quite an effective process and has worked in the past before. And the great thing is that it eliminates the need to go through expensive court and lengthy court cases to try and undo legislation after the fact. It's an opportunity for public to influence draft legislation before it becomes actual legislation.
And that's on the assumption that each email is considered and potentially has an impact. I remember an interview that we did with Sakelicha, and that was around some of the COVID changes to the National Health Act. And they found that government had actually ignored and suppressed several submissions.
We were also involved in that, and our system can pick up whether government it monitors absolutely every comment that gets individually delivered. It can actually pick up whether government has opened them, read them, clicked through them, how long they've had them open for, and so on. And must be honest, government doesn't read many comments at all. In fact, I'd say less than 1% of them actually get read, which is quite a problem. But that being said, that's exactly the reason why we keep a record of every comment that's delivered, and we send that summary through to government. And should organizations like Sakelicha want to take government on, they have the perfect foundation of evidence relating to public participation available through our platform.
You guys do incredibly important work in the public interest. Has your website ever been hacked? Strange phone calls at night, Rob? Any intimidation?
Yes, absolutely. We've had quite an interesting, there's constant attempts at hacking the website, obviously trying to get to the database and so on. But the most interesting one we had was a data injection. So we had in two campaigns, we had a data injection of in the one campaign it was up to about 40,000 fake comments were injected into one of the participation forms. And that was done to sway the outcome towards a favorable directional outcome for the state. And we picked it up, or luckily, they were all sent from the same IP address. So it was quite simple to pick it up. Even though that IP address was a VPN, it still didn't make any sense. And in all consecutively after one another. So the system just shut down, and we had to reboot it and set up another catch to catch them all. But yeah, it happened twice. So it's quite understanding that people would do it to sway public opinion and outcome of public participation.
Are you able to say on which amendment or which proposal that was on?
I think it was the hate speech bill, one of the hate speech bill, and Papuda bill.
Interesting. This IP address, I mean, it could have had a .gov.za address. I think that would have been probably less obvious than what happened. Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you for the time, and thank you for the work that you do. Rob Hutchinson, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Michael.